Chapter 27. The Musée Armandier did not, quote, mérite le détour, unquote, in Michelin speak. It scarcely qualified as being worth a visit. But Ambler remembered it well from the year he spent in Paris as a youth and doubted it had changed much. It was one of the few private art museums in Paris, and, to maintain its fiscal status as a museum, dutifully kept regular hours of admission. Yet it was largely deserted. It probably had less traffic than it did when it had been a private residence in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. As a house, a neo-Italian villa in style, with grandly arching windows deeply set in Purbeck limestone and a partially enclosed courtyard, it was not unimpressive. Built by a Protestant banker who profited enormously from deals during the Second Empire, it was situated in the Plaine Marceau section of the 8th arrondissement, then a neighborhood favored by Bonapartist noblemen and a newer class of financiers, and notably quiet even now. From time to time, the Musée Armandier would be rented by film crews working on costume dramas. Otherwise, it was among the least visited public spaces in Paris. A fine place for a youthful assignation, perhaps, Ambler smiled at a long-ago memory, but of little interest to the museum-going public. The trouble was the collection. Marcel Armandier's wife, Jacqueline Armandier, had a taste for ROCOCO, art from the early 18th century, the school of work that had been decidedly out of fashion for the past half-century. Worse still, she had a penchant for second-rate art canvases by such minor talents as François Boucher, Nicolas de Largiere, Francesco Trevisani, and Giacomo Amiconi. She liked her cupids to be plump and beaming, cavorting in a perfectly turquoise sky, and her Arcadian shepherds to be as Arcadian as possible. She sized up the landscapes as if it were the property depicted, not the picture itself that she were acquiring. In deeding the mansion to be a museum, Jacqueline, who survived her husband by a decade, must have hoped she was ensuring that her possessions would be celebrated through the succeeding generations. Instead, the odd art historian who paid a visit generally greeted Jacqueline's collection with muted catcalls, or worse, the mockery of campy adoration. Ambler appreciated the museum for other reasons. Unpopular as it was a good place for a private encounter, and the combination of plentiful windows and a quiet street would enable him to detect any stalker patrols. At the same time, the Armandier Foundation, charged with husbanding a limited budget, hired only a single guard for the whole museum, and the guard seldom wandered farther up than the second floor. Now Ambler mounted the stairs to the 4th floor and turned down a hallway with gilt moldings and a long painting of Elvira, strumming goddesses, cavorting on what looked like a golf course, and made his way to the large room at the end, where he and Caston had agreed to meet. His footsteps were muffled by the peach-colored carpeting, and he could hear Caston's voice as he approached. Ambler froze, felt a prickle of apprehension running down his neck. Was Caston with someone? Silently he came closer until he could make out the words. "Good," Caston was saying, "and is that right? And so they're doing okay?" A man talking on a cell phone. There was a long moment of silence. "Good night, Huggle Bunny," Caston said. "Love you too." He closed the flip phone and pocketed it as Ambler entered the room. "Glad you made it," Caston said. "Huggle Bunny?" Ambler asked. Flushing, the auditor turned and looked out the window. "I had my office check the border control database," the auditor said after a while. "Dr. Ashton Palmer arrived in ROISSY yesterday. He's here." "Your office. Can you trust their discretion?" "I say my office, but it's really one person, my assistant, and yes, I trust him." "What else did you learn?" "I didn't say I learned anything else." "You did," Ambler corrected him, "just not in words." Caston glanced around at the canvas-crowded walls and scowled. The thing is, it's messy, and I'm not sure what to make of it yet. It's what they call chatter. Small interceptions, some fragmentary in nature, each inconclusive on its own. But added together, something's going on, or maybe I should say that something's about to happen. Something involving China, Ambler broke in. Well, that's the easier part of the conundrum. You're talking in riddles yourself. The harder part is you. Approaching matters logically, that's the place to start. Call it a variant of the anthropic principle, what we call observation selection effects. Look, Caston, would you try speaking English? Caston glared. Observation selection effects are totally commonplace. At the supermarket, have you ever noticed how often you find yourself in the longer checkout line? Why is that? Because those are the lines with the most people in them. Let's say I told you that Mr. Smith, about whom you knew nothing at all, was standing on one of the checkout lines, and you had to predict which one, based only on knowing how many people were in each line. There'd be no way to know. But inference is about probabilities, and the most probable outcome, obviously, is that he's in the line with the most people in it. Once you step back and consider yourself from an outsider's perspective, it becomes self-evident. The slowest traffic lane is the one with the most cars in it. The laws of probability say that any given driver is most likely to be in that lane. That means you. It's not bad luck or delusion that makes you think the other lanes of traffic are going faster. More often than not, they are going faster. Right, Ambler said. It's obvious. It is obvious, Caston said, once it's pointed out, just as if you knew nothing about a person except that he or she lived on this planet today, and you were asked to guess the person's country of origin. You should guess that the person is Chinese. You'd be wrong less often than if you named any other country of origin, simply because China is the world's most populous nation. Newsflash, Ambler said, I'm not Chinese. No, but you've become entangled in something that involves Chinese politics, and the question is, why you? In the case of the checkout line, not much distinguishes you from any other shopper, but in this case, the population, the list of eligible candidates, is a lot more rarefied. I didn't choose this thing, I was chosen. Again, the question is, why? The auditor pressed. What information did they have about you? Which data points were pertinent? Ambler remembered what various people involved in the strategic services group had told him. He was special from their perspective. Paul Fenton told me they decided I was a magician because I'd erased myself. When, in point of fact, you'd been erased, if you want to put it that way. But this suggests that they had a particular need for an agent who can't be identified. And not just any agent either. An agent with special skills. An agent with fantastically honed skills at inferring emotion. A walking polygraph. Fenton had my stab records, or some of them. He didn't know my name, my real name, but he knew my assignments, what I'd done, where I'd been. So consider that factor too. There are your inherent characteristics, and there are these historical ones. Who you are and what you've done. Either or both could be relevant. Wouldn't want to leap to conclusions, huh? Caston smiled wanly. His eyes lingered on a painting of a verdant expanse of rolling green with a picturesque scattering of dappled cows and a flaxen-haired milkmaid with a beatific glow carrying a pail. You know the old story about an economist, a physicist, and a mathematician driving through Scotland? They see a brown cow out of the window, and the economist says, "Fascinating that the cows in Scotland are brown." The physicist says, "I'm afraid you're overgeneralizing from the evidence. All we know is that some cows in Scotland are brown." Finally, the mathematician shakes his head at both of them. Wrong again. Completely unwarranted by the evidence. All we can infer logically is that there exists at least one cow in this country, at least one side of which is brown. Ambler rolled his eyes. I was wrong when I said you were the guy gets to the shootout in time to pick up the shell casings. Actually, you're the guy who, 1,000 years later, picks the shell casings out of an archaeological dig. Caston just looked at him. I'm simply trying to get you to look for patterns, because the fact is that there's a pattern here. Changhua, Montreal, and now Paris. The Duchessness incident. Changhua, I tried to stop it. Too late, but I tried. But you failed, and you were there. Meaning? Meaning there's very likely photographic evidence of your presence. You can't infer much from a single brown cow, but 3 brown cows in a row. That's where the laws of probability come into play. The question is why they wanted you, and what they really wanted you for. Changhua, Montreal, Paris. It's not just a string of events, Ambler, it's a sequence. Fine, Ambler said testily. The overheated museum was causing him to perspire. It's a sequence. What's that mean? Meaning we need to do the math. 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55. That's the Fibonacci sequence. A child might look at those numbers and not see the pattern, but the pattern is staring him in the face. Each number in the sequence is the sum of the preceding 2. Every series is like that, however random it might appear. There is a pattern, a rule, an algorithm, and it makes order out of seeming chaos. That's what we need here. We need to see how each event is connected to the one before, because then we'll know what the next event is going to be. Caston looked grave. Then again, we can just wait for the next event to happen. That might make everything clear. From every indication we've got, we're about to see what it's all leading up to. In which case, it's probably too late, Ambler grunted. So it's a progression, meaning basically you have no idea what the logic is. Meaning we need to find out. Caston gave him a look that was both wry and wintry. If I were superstitious, I'd say you were bad luck. Luck can change. The auditor winced. True sequences don't change, not unless you change them. Langley. Adrian Choi fidgeted with his ear stud as he sat at his boss's desk. It felt good sitting there, and there couldn't be any harm in it. Besides, it wasn't as if anybody ever passed by. The hallway where Caston had his office wasn't out of bounds, but it was out of the way. Office Space Siberia. Adrian made another phone call. Caston had been dogged about trying to get those Parrish Island personnel files, and when Adrian asked how he could hope to succeed where Caston had failed, he said that thing about charm. Adrian didn't have Caston's authority, but there were informal roots. He smiled his sunniest smile as he called an assistant at the Joint Facilities Center, someone at his level. Caston had spoken to her boss to no avail. He'd grumbled and protested and blustered. Adrian would try another approach. The woman who answered would need a lot of warming up. She sounded immediately wary. PIPF Ward 4W, yes, I know, she said. I'll have to process the request forms. No, see, you guys already gave us a copy of the files, Adrian lied. Joint Facilities did? Yep, Adrian said breezily. I'm just asking for another copy. Oh, the young woman said a little less frostily. Sorry, bureaucracy, right? Tell me about it, Adrian said, making his voice as silkily confiding as he could. I'd like to say it was a matter of national security, but it's really a matter of saving my own ass. How do you mean? Well, Caitlin. It's Caitlin, right? That's right, she said. Was he imagining it, or was she warming up ever so subtly? You sound like the kind of person who never messes up, so I don't expect much sympathy from you. Me? She giggled. Are you kidding? Nah, I know your type. You've got everything under control. Every scrap of paper's in order in your office. No comment, she said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. Hey, it's important to have somebody to look up to, Adrian said. I got this whole image of you in my mind. You gotta let me cherish that. You're a funny guy. Then I must have been clowning when I forwarded the file directly to the DDI's office without keeping a copy for my boss. Adrian's voice was wheedling, but a little flirtatious too. Which means my boss is totally going to pitch a fit, and my Stanford-educated ass is grass. He paused. Listen, that's my problem, not yours. I didn't mean to lay this on you. Never mind, really. The young woman on the other end of the line sighed. It's just that they've been really uptight about the whole thing. God knows why. Everything's in some Omega-level sequestered database. Intramural rivalries are always the fiercest, right? I guess, she said doubtfully. Listen, I'll see what I can do, okay? You're a lifesaver, Caitlin, said Adrian. I mean that. Paris. Burton Lasker looked at his watch yet again and prowled the Air France lounge. It wasn't like Fenton to be late, yet the flight had already started to board and Fenton had still not appeared. Lasker checked with the attendants at the gate. They replied to his questioning gaze with a simple shake of the head. He had already asked them 2 or 3 times whether Fenton had appeared. A wave of annoyance swept through Lasker. There were any number of circumstances that could delay a passenger, but Fenton was the sort of person who prepared for the usual exigencies and inconveniences of travel. He had a well-developed sense of the tolerances of daily life and knew how far to test them. So where was he now? Why wasn't he answering his cell phone? Lasker had been in Fenton's employ for a decade and, at least for the past several years, could style himself Fenton's staunchest lieutenant. Every visionary required someone who devoted himself to the tightly focused task of execution, of follow-through. Lasker excelled at that. He was a veteran of the Special Forces, but he never felt the contempt that some military men had for the civilian. Fenton was a patron of the operatives, as some people were patrons of artists. And Fenton truly was a visionary, truly understood how a private-public partnership could transform America's strengths in clandestine operations. Fenton, in turn, respected Lasker for his first-hand knowledge of ops and combat, and the subtler operations of the counterterrorism squadrons he had helped train. Lasker considered his years with Fenton the most valuable and gratifying of his entire adult life. Where was the man? As the Air France attendants with an apologetic shrug closed the ramp doors, Lasker felt an icicle of fear within his gut. Something was wrong. He phoned the front desk of the hotel where he and Fenton had both been staying. No, Monsieur Fenton has not checked out. Something was very wrong. Laurel Holland finally joined the other 2 men at the still deserted 4th floor of the Musée Armandier a few minutes later than they had planned. Her errands had taken her longer than she had expected, she explained. You must be Clayton Caston, she said to the auditor and extended a hand. Her posture, as well as her words, was slightly formal. She still seemed to fear what he was, what he represented as a senior CIA official. At the same time, she trusted Ambler's judgment implicitly. He had made the decision to deal with Caston. She would follow suit. Ambler had to hope that he was not mistaken. I'm Clay, the auditor replied. In your hands, anyway. Nice to meet you, Laura. Your first time in France, Hal tells me. Mine, too, if you can believe it. My first time, and if I'm lucky, my last time, Caston groused. I hate this country. At the hotel, I turned on the shower knob marked C and practically scalded myself. I swear I could hear 50 million Frenchmen laughing. 50 million Frenchmen can't be wrong, Laurel told him solemnly. Isn't that what they say? 50 million Frenchmen, Caston replied with a reproving stare, can be wrong in 50 million ways. But who's counting, Ambler said lightly, scanning the faces of the few pedestrians in the area. He glanced down at the newspaper Laurel had taken with her for cover, Le Monde Diplomatique. On the front page was an article by one Bertrand Louis Cohn, apparently an intellectual of note. Ambler skimmed it. The occasion was a conference of the World Economic Forum at Davos. but the contents seem to be gaseous generalizations about the current economic conjecture. Something about la pensée unique, which Louis Cohn wrote, could be defined by its enemies as la projection idéologique des intérêts financiers de la capitale mondiale, the ideological projection of the financial interests of global capital, or the hegemony of the rich. On and on it went, recycling leftist criticisms of l'orthodoxie libérale without either endorsing them or rejecting them. The whole essay seemed like some sort of weirdly stylized activity, intellectual kabuki. "What's that say?" Laura asked, pointing to the article. "It's about some meeting of global titans in Davos, the World Economic Forum." "Oh," she said, "is the guy for it or against it?" "Beats the hell out of me," Ambler said. "I was there once," the auditor said. "The World Economic Forum wanted my expertise for some panel on money laundering. They like a scattering of people who actually know what they're talking about. It's like the greenery in a floral arrangement." Ambler peered through the window to the street again, confirming that nobody suspicious had entered the vicinity. "Here's the thing. I'm tired of playing blind man's buff. I think it's supposed to be blind man's bluff, but it says buff. Anywho. We know there's a pattern here, a progression or sequence, like you say, but this time I need to know the next step ahead of time. My assistant is working on getting more information from Joint Intel Resources, Caston said. I think we should wait to see what he finds out. Ambler gave the back office man a flinty look. "You're along for the ride, Caston, nothing more. Like I say, this isn't your world." Wu Jinggu was a soft-spoken man, but he found he seldom had difficulty making himself heard. His career in the Ministry of State Security had established his reputation as a sober analyst, someone who was neither a Pollyanna nor an alarmist. He was someone people listened to, yet President Liu Eng was frustratingly unmoved by his counsel. Little wonder that the muscles in Wu's narrow shoulders were bunched with tension. He lay face down and motionless on the narrow cushioned table as he readied himself for his twice-weekly massage, trying to banish the stress from his mind. "Your muscles are still very tight," the masseuse said, her strong fingers manipulating the flesh around his shoulders. It was not a voice he recognized, not his usual masseuse. He craned his head and looked at the substitute. "Where's May?" "May felt under the weather today, sir. I'm Jeanne. It is okay?" Jeanne was even more beautiful than May, and her grip was strong and confident. Wu nodded contentedly. The elite and exclusive Caspera Spa, newly opened in Beijing, hired only the very best, that was clear. He turned back, placing his head on the open headrest, and listened to the soothing piped-in sounds of bubbling water and softly plucked guzheng. He felt as if Jeanne's fingers were dissolving tension wherever they roamed. "Excellent," he murmured. "For the welfare of the ship, one must calm the turbulent seas." "That is our specialty, sir," Jeanne said softly. "Such tight muscles, you must have many burdens and responsibilities placed upon you." "Many," Wu murmured. "But I know just the thing, sir. I am in your hands." The beautiful masseuse began to apply acupressure to the soles of his feet, and he felt a growing lightness suffuse his body. So dozy was the security advisor that he did not respond at once when a hypodermic needle was inserted just beneath the toenail of his left foot. This sharp sensation was so incongruous that, at least at first, it did not register. And then, moments later, a wave of utter relaxation suffused his body like a tide of numbness. In the next few moments, he could only foggily contemplate the difference between relaxation and paralysis. He felt dead to the world. And then, as Jean matter-of-factly confirmed, he was just dead. Bert and Lasker boarded the George V elevator with the smooth-faced young manager on duty. When they reached the 7th floor, the young man knocked on the heavy oak door, then unlocked it with a special key card. The two men strode through the room, seeing no sign of habitation. Then the hotelier stepped into the bathroom. His face was ashen as he stepped out. Lasker immediately rushed over and saw what the other man had seen. He gasped. It felt as if there were a balloon inside his chest, making it hard to breathe. "You were a friend of his?" the hotelier asked. "A friend and business associate," Lasker confirmed. "I am sorry." The man paused awkwardly. "Help will arrive shortly. I will make the calls." Lasker stood rooted to the spot, trying to calm himself. Paul Fenton. His reddened, blistered body was slumped in the bathtub, naked. Lasker noticed the still steaming bath water, the empty bottle of vodka propped by the basin, stage dressing that might confuse the gendarmerie but did not fool Lasker for a moment. A remarkable man, a great man, had been murdered. Lasker had a strong suspicion who was behind it, and when he went through Paul Fenton's PDA, his suspicions were confirmed. It was the man Fenton had called Tarquin, a man Lasker knew all too well. Tarquin had served in the political stabilization unit, and Lasker, field name Cronus, had had the misfortune of serving with him on a couple of assignments. Tarquin had somehow imagined himself superior to his colleagues and was oblivious to how much support they selflessly gave him. Tarquin was known for his peculiar gift of reading people, a gift that some of the strategists at consular operations were overly impressed with. They couldn't grasp what seasoned operatives like Cronus knew as a matter of second nature, that operational success always came down to firepower and muscle. Now, Tarquin had killed the greatest man Lasker had ever known, and he would pay. He would pay with the only currency that Lasker would accept, his life. What sickened Lasker was that he had once saved Tarquin's life, not that Tarquin could be bothered to display anything akin to gratitude. Lasker recalled a humid, mosquito-ridden night nearly 10 years ago in the jungles of Jaffna, Sri Lanka. That night, he had risked his own life to charge in, guns blazing, and save Tarquin from a group of terrorists who were planning to kill him. Mordantly, Lasker remembered the bitter old adage, "No good deed goes unpunished." He had saved the life of a monster, an error for which he would now make amends. Fenton did not explain everything that he was up to. No visionary could be expected to. Once, when he had asked Fenton about the rationale of a particular deployment, Fenton had said to him lightly, "Yours is but to do and kill." It was no longer a laughing matter. Lasker whisked through the transmission log of Fenton's wireless PDA. He would send a message to the condemned man. First, though, calls would be made to the dozen or so associates that SSG had on the ground in Paris. They would be put on alert at once, precise mobilization orders to follow shortly. A spasm of profound grief passed over Lasker, and yet he could not allow himself grief until he had experienced vengeance. He summoned the discipline of his rarefied profession. A rendezvous with the condemned man would be established for sunset. It would be, Lasker resolved, the last sunset Tarquin would ever see. The last sunset Tarquin would ever see. Caleb Norris pressed the off button of his cell phone. It was foolish that the CIA permitted the use of cell phones in headquarters at all, he reflected. Their presence nullified a great deal of the elaborate security precautions that were taken, like waterproofing a sieve. But at the moment, the circumstance suited him very well. He fed various papers into the shredder beside his desk, retrieved his coat, and finally unlocked a steel-lined case secreted in his credenza. The long-barreled handgun fitted neatly into his briefcase. "Have a great trip, Mr. Norris," Brenda Wallenstein said in her familiar nasal voice. She had been Norris's secretary for the past 5 years and devotedly followed the fashions of workplace injuries. When news stories started to appear about repetitive motion disorder, she started showing up with special wrist braces and pressure bandages. More recently, she had taken to wearing special headphones like a telephone operator in order to spare her neck the perils of cinching up a handset. There had been a time, Norris vaguely recalled, when she started to develop scent allergies. That those allergies had failed to develop was only a function of her somewhat limited attention span. Norris had long ago concluded that she simply preferred to imagine her job, which largely involved sitting at a keyboard and answering the phone, as being, in its way, every bit as hazardous as a tour of duty in the Marines. In her mind, anyway, she was obviously awarding herself as many injuries sustained badges. "Thank you, Brenda," the ADDI replied heartily. "I intend to." "Don't get sunburned," her secretary cautioned with her unfailing instinct for identifying the dark sides of all situations. "See down there, they even have these little umbrellas so the drinks don't get sunburned. Those rays are strong. I went online and looked up the weather forecast for St. John and the Virgin Islands, and it's supposed to be nothing but clear skies." "Just what we like to hear. Joshua and I went to St. Croix one year." She pronounced the word to rhyme with stoics. "He got such a sunburn on the first day. He was smearing spearmint toothpaste on his face just to get cool. Can you picture it?" "I'd rather not if it's all the same to you." Norris briefly debated whether to take additional ammunition, but decided against. It was a little-known fact about him that he was an excellent shot. Brenda cackled. "Forewarned is forearmed, right? But St. John has got to be just what the doctor ordered. Blue skies, blue sea, white sand. And I just checked, your car is here, waiting at the 2A bay with your luggage. Dulles shouldn't even take half an hour at this time of day. Should be smooth sailing." She was right. For all her garrulity and self-imposed mortification, she was actually quite efficient. But Cal Norris had left himself plenty of time at the airport. Even with all the right paperwork, checking a weapon could take some time. In the event, the line at business class moved fast. "Good afternoon," the airline clerk behind the counter said in his program greeting. "And where are you headed for today?" Norris slid his ticket across the counter. "Zurich," he said. "Skiing, I bet." The clerk glanced at Norris's passport and ticket invoice before stamping his board card. Norris stole a glance at his watch. What else? As he watched a gust sweep through the street outside the Musée Armandier, Ambler felt the BlackBerry vibrating in an inside coat pocket. It had to be a message from Fenton or one of his people who had given him the device in the first place. He scanned its small screen quickly. A deputy of Fenton's had called to arrange a meeting this evening, an outdoor rendezvous this time. As Ambler returned the device to his pocket, he felt a faint sense of unease. "Where?" asked Laurel. "Pere Lachaise," the operative replied. "Not the most imaginative venue, but I can see its advantages, and Fenton never likes to meet in the same place twice." "Worries me," Laurel said. "I don't like the sound of it." "Because it's a cemetery? It might as well be an amusement park. It's a pretty heavily trafficked area. Trust me, I know what I'm doing." "I wish I shared your confidence," Caston said. "Fenton's a goddamn wild card. His whole arrangement with the federal government is a can of worms. Had my office look into it a bit, and it seems they buried it under black box appropriations. A high-level shroud. Nothing I can penetrate while I'm here, but I'd love to have a chance to review those numbers. Damned irregular, I'd bet." He blinked. "As for a rendezvous at Pere Lachaise with people like that goes beyond the category of risk and into the dark realm of uncertainty." Caston, damn it, I already live in the dark realm of uncertainty, Ambler said, flaring. Or haven't you noticed? Laurel reached a hand over to his. I'm just saying, be careful, she said. You still don't know what these people are really up to. I'll be careful, but we're getting close. Close to finding out what they did to you? Yes, Ambler said. And close to finding out what they may have planned for the rest of the world. Take care of yourself, Hal, she said. With a side glance at Caston, she leaned forward and whispered in Ambler's ear, I really don't have a good feeling about this. Beijing. We must get the message to President Liu, Wan Sai said, the horror in his gaze further magnified by his convex wire-rimmed glasses. But what if Comrade Chow's death really was an accident? Li Pei asked. The two had convened in Wan Sai's office in the Hall of Diligent Government. What if it was? Do you believe that? Wan Sai demanded. A faint chest rattle was audible as the older man exhaled. No, he said, I don't. Li Pei was in his late 70s, but suddenly looked older still. We have all gone through the proper channels, Wan Sai said, not for the first time. We have all raised the alarm, yet I find that he is already in the air halfway there. We must get him to come back. Except he will not come back, Li Pei wheezed. We both know that about him. He is as wise as an owl and as stubborn as a mule. A mournful look passed over his age-etched countenance, and who knows whether he might confront even greater dangers at home. Have you spoken to Wu Jinggu, Chow's colleague? Nobody seems to know where he is at the moment. The economist swallowed hard. How can that be? Wan Sai shook his head in a shuddering motion. Nobody knows. I've spoken to everyone else, though. We all want to think what happened to Chow was an accident. None of us truly can. The economist ran a hand through his thick, graying hair. It's not too soon to start wondering about Wu Jinggu as well, the old man said. A harrowed look threatened what remained of Wan Sai's composure. Who's in charge of Luang's security retinue? You know who, the wily peasant said. Wan Sai closed his eyes briefly. The PLA, you mean? A unit under PLA control. It comes to the same thing. Wan Sai looked around him at his own sprawling office, at the Grand Hall of Diligent Government, at the facades of the Zhongnanhai that were visible from his outer window. The doors, the walls, the gates, the bars, every implement of security struck him as a tool of imprisonment. I will speak to the general in charge, Wan Sai said abruptly. I will appeal to him personally. Many of these generals are men of honor on a personal level, whatever their political views may be. A few minutes later, he had secured a connection to the man in whose safekeeping President Luang currently was. Wan Sai made no secret of his anxieties, admitted that they were not yet founded upon evidentiary certainty, and implored the man to have his retinue convey to Luang an urgent message. Have no worries on that score, said the PLA official in a harsh, Hakka-inflected Mandarin. Nothing could be of greater importance to me than the state of Luang's security, because I cannot stress enough that all of us who work with Luang are extremely concerned, the economist said, not for the first time. We are in complete agreement, the PLA official, General Lam, said reassuringly. As people from my village say, right eye, left eye. Trust that our beloved leader's safety will be my personal priority. At least Wan Sai thought that was what the general said. The man's heavy accent made the word priority sound almost like another seldom used Mandarin word which meant plaything.